Come on, them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast. Welcome to the Week 11 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. My name is Warren Sharp of sharpfootballanalysis.com. An exciting edition of the podcast because the NFL this past week was very exciting as well. We saw a large number of underdogs, big underdogs, win their games outright. And that gives us a lot of things to discuss. It gives us a lot of opportunity to discuss why did the favorites lose? How did the underdogs win? Did they do something different than normal? Did they just execute better? Was it turnovers? A lot of interesting things to discuss, different reasons for a variety of these different games. So that's always fun. That also leads us into discussing a lot of different headlines. Usually I'll do about 3 different headlines of things that I research a little bit more in depth that I want to share with you that I think you guys might learn something from, things that you maybe didn't see in the mainstream media's breakdown of this weekend's games, and there's a large number of those this week. In fact, instead of 3, I believe I'm going through 6 different headlines for you soon on this podcast, so we're going to dig into all those great reasons as to things that I noticed from teams, strategy, situations, things teams need to improve, other instances we're going to be looking at things that we could take away and utilize next week in terms of value. So a lot of great information that I'm going to be sharing with you that I don't think you'll have heard elsewhere, especially from the mainstream media. And then we're going to dig down into breaking down every single one of these games in great detail. So I think this podcast is going to be very exciting and a lot of great information. Before we dig into the podcast, I wanted to remind you of one thing and then give you an announcement. The reminder relates to subscribing to this podcast. We record a Saturday weekend edition and a early Tuesday week edition. The Tuesday edition, we look back at the games that were, break down the reasons for why teams won or lost. The Saturday edition, we get with Evan Silva of rotoworld.com. We go through every single one of the key games, looking at matchups, looking at what we think is going to happen in those games, and then we break down positionally a lot of the players in terms of if you're interested in daily fantasy. So whether you're interested in sports betting or daily fantasy, we've got 2 great minds here that are going to give you a lot of unique information on those podcasts. So I highly suggest that you subscribe to it on iTunes. You can also subscribe to it on YouTube. So that's the reminder. The announcement is that typically every year I like to give people a free peek into what I do in terms of over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. I like to give a lot of free information. Obviously, I write articles. Some of these articles appear at Fox or ESPN or other websites like that. But, my blog typically during the season, there's good stuff there, but it kind of slows down as I'm focusing 100% on breaking down these games for the guys that I work for, and then the guys that subscribe to my service. So there's a very intent focus from me to try to be successful every single season. And so far this season, the hard work is paying off. Right now I'm hitting 63% in the NFL, including 65% from my computer totals. And usually what I try to do at least once before the season's over is give everybody else out there who maybe isn't as focused on my recommendations, maybe doesn't bet as much on sports, but just wants to get a sneak peek as to how I do things over at the site. I like to give you guys that sneak peek. So what I'm doing this week is giving you all free access to the NFL recommendations that I'm releasing. I obviously do college totals as well, but this is only for NFL. And the way that you're going to be able to get access to all this information is you go to the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com, you go to the purchase tab, and you get the package that says Week 11 NFL Special Free Preview. That package is going to have a price of $1. The reason it's $1 is because you have to be able to check out at the store to gain access to the system. And you have to gain access to the system so that you can get the announcements. Every time I release a recommendation, you'll get an announcement saying that this recommendation is going to be released. Then you'll get that release itself. So you'll get pre-release announcement and then the actual recommendation. You'll get those in the form of email delivered to you so that you get them the same time as every single client. Everybody gets these games the exact same time. Everybody has the exact same opportunities to get down on the games in case the lines begin to move. So the reason that I'm doing it that way is so that you guys get every single thing exactly like my clients would get. And as a result, you have to pay $1. I will be refunding those dollar purchases on Tuesday morning after the Monday night games are over. So it is indeed 100% free. You pay $1, you get the $1 back, and that'll give you access to all the Week 11 NFL recommendations that I'm sharing. So if you're interested in that, that is going to occur this week, and that is going to occur over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. With that said, let's go ahead and dive right into these Week 11 headlines because there's a lot of great information that I've got to share with you on this podcast, so let's get started. Story number 1, the New York Giants' inefficiency inside the red zone and how it cost them against the New England Patriots. They lost that game by only 1 point, obviously, as we know, on a last-second field goal by Gostowski at the end to win the game for the New England Patriots. However, the New York Giants went 1 of 5 inside the red zone. The Patriots got to the Giants' red zone 4 times and scored 2 touchdowns, but the Giants only scored 1 touchdown in 5 trips into the Patriots' red zone. Now, later we'll discuss perhaps why that last and final trip into the red zone actually is the trip that cost the Giants the game right then and there, because they were far too aggressive on a 2nd down and 5 play call on the New England Patriots' 23-yard line with 2 minutes and 10 seconds left and the Patriots having only 1 timeout. If they slow played that a little bit better, they would have still had the same type of field goal attempt, but they might have had the opportunity to run off even more plays and end the game right then and there. Instead, they threw a deep pass down the field to the New England 5-yard line, and at that point they just ran out of field space and they had no other opportunity to run out the clock. There was no other first downs to be gained except by a defensive penalty, which obviously did not occur. However, let's talk about the issue of their inefficiency inside the red zone. I've said this before on the podcast, but the New York Giants have a distinct lack of running game inside the red zone. In fact, according to some of the efficiency metrics, they actually rank 30th in the NFL in terms of their efficiency inside the red zone when running the football. The only teams that are worse are the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Indianapolis Colts. So they're clearly one of the worst teams in the NFL at running the football. So what did they do in their last game against the New England Patriots? Well, in their 5 trips to the red zone, guess how many rushing attempts they had? 0 rushing attempts. They decided just to go pass heavy, which I'm not in total disagreement with given their inefficiency by running the football. However, here's the problem. Their number 1 target inside the red zone obviously is Odell Beckham. And on the season, Eli Manning, in his 54 pass attempts, has thrown 14 of them to Odell Beckham, by far the most of any player on the New York Giants. So he's throwing the ball a lot to Odell Beckham. However, in the red zone, it's a lot easier to cover a guy like Odell Beckham, who utilizes a lot of his long field speed and some of his deeper moves down the field to get open. In the red zone, all of that is far more compact. You don't have to cover a player for that length of time. So the New England Patriots were able to scheme around Odell Beckham a lot more effectively inside the red zone, and as a result, he was only targeted by Eli Manning 1 time and didn't have a single catch inside the red zone. Eli Manning, therefore, went 2 of 8 inside the red zone for only 0.3 yards per attempt because those 2 passes only resulted in 2 total yards. And his passer rating was a 79. He threw 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions, but was also sacked twice. His number 1 target in the red zone on Sunday against the Patriots was Dwayne Harris. And Dwayne Harris only caught 1 of 3 passes. It was a touchdown, a 1-yard touchdown pass. So they're simply not moving the ball around enough. Their number 2 target on the season inside the red zone was Larry Donnell, their tight end. And Larry Donnell was out this game due to injury. So there really was not the opportunity for Eli Manning to do much with the football inside the red zone because Your number 2 target is out. Your number 1 target clearly then gets a lot of more attention paid to him inside the red zone, which is Odell Beckham. And as a result, Eli Manning is having to force the ball into guys like Dwayne Harris and Jerome Cunningham and Miles White and Will Tye. All those guys had targets in this game inside the red zone, and clearly those are not ideal. And as a result, that's where you get 1 of 5 inside the red zone. So had the New York Giants been a little bit more efficient in the red zone, this game would not have ended the way that it did. And as a result, the Giants have a loss and drop to 5-5 on the season, and the New England Patriots get to keep their undefeated season continuing. Story number 2, what could have been for the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm not going to try to sit here and make anybody feel sorry for the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, we know their situation with Greg Hardy, and obviously we know their history in terms of calling themselves America's team when most of America does not like them. But I will say this as sort of a rant against the NFL, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about the Dallas Cowboys themselves. What is the NFL doing with their scheduling? The NFL was supposed to be backloading these schedules with divisional games that matter, so that late in the season, games mean something. Late in the season, division is on the line. And look at the Dallas Cowboys schedule throughout the course of the season. The only team that they still have left to play in their division is the Washington Redskins. That's right. Through their first 8 games, they finished the season series with the Eagles. They finished the season series with the Giants. They only have 2 games left versus the Redskins. Non-division, they play 3 teams from the AFC East in their remaining schedule. 3, the Dolphins, the Jets, and the Bills. They also play the Packers and the Carolina Panthers. Those games come courtesy of them winning the division last year and having to play the number 1 seed in both those other conferences, the NFC North and the NFC South. But there's no way, unfortunately, if you're trying to get a competitive game going here, competitive division run to close out the NFC East, that the Dallas Cowboys can get back into it. And that's what I wanted to see, because guess what? Now they've got Tony Romo back in the fold. And Tony Romo is going to make a massive difference for this team. An absolutely massive difference in my opinion. So I'm going on record right now and saying look out for the Dallas Cowboys. And I know they may not make the playoffs, but look out for them throughout the course of this rest of the season. We'll have to see how they do straight up. We'll have to see how they do against the spread. The problem for them, of course, they've got a very difficult schedule remaining. So straight up record is not going to be good enough for them to win this division. The reason it's not going to be good enough for them to win this division is I don't see them sweeping, which means they're not going 9-7, which means at the minimum they're going 8-8 or 7-9. Now, if they had games against the Giants left, where they could beat the Giants and win that head-to-head and give a Giants a loss in the loss column, that's a way that they could leapfrog things very quickly in the NFC East. But that's not the case. They only play the Redskins. They've got 2 games against the Redskins. So the Giants right now sitting at 5-5. There's no way that the Dallas Cowboys can do anything against the Giants to help slow them down. Even if the Giants split the rest of their games, they're going to be 8-8. And I don't see the Dallas Cowboys being able to improve on their position above 8-8. They're going to be at a minimum tied with that if they have the best close of the season that they probably ever could have, which is going in their last 7 games going 6-1, which is going to be very difficult given their schedule, given the fact that 4 of these 7 games are on the road. So it's just frustrating to see the NFL schedule things like that, but I'm sure it's even more frustrating for the Dallas Cowboys. And let's look at what the Dallas Cowboys have done. Obviously, they have not won a single game without Tony Romo in there. So the question becomes, if they had Tony Romo, how might they have done in these games? Well, they got crushed against the Patriots, and maybe that game goes differently with Tony Romo in there. But let's just assume they still get crushed by the New England Patriots, even with Tony Romo in there. They lost to the Atlanta Falcons in a game where you could definitely argue at this point that Tony Romo could have helped them. But look at the rest of the games. They went to overtime against the Saints in Week 4. Clearly, Tony Romo would have made a massive difference there, and they probably won that game. The Giants game in Week 7, they probably should have won anyways, even with the backup quarterback in there. The Cowboys were -4 in turnover margin. They let and gave the Giants 2 return touchdowns in that game. So 2 touchdowns did not even come from the offense for the New York Giants in that game. And yet the Giants only win that game by 7 points. So that was a game that the Cowboys if you play that game out probably 7 out of 10 times at least, the Cowboys with those stats, they're not going to win that game. But if they don't record those stats, if their stats improve a little bit, they don't go -4 in turnover margin, they don't allow 2 non-offensive touchdowns, Cowboys are winning that game more often than not. With Tony Romo, forget about it. Then they have the game against Seattle where they're up in the fourth quarter and they lose that game by 1 point. That's the game that Tony Romo obviously helps. The following week against the Philadelphia Eagles, that game goes into overtime. And in that game, guess what is similar against that game against the Giants game as well? They lost a turnover battle, and they gave the Eagles a non-offensive touchdown, a return touchdown. So that's another game where Tony Romo would have made a massive difference. Now, the game against the Bucs, last week, Tony Romo would have made a big difference there as well. But I can't say in that game that the Cowboys, as they currently were on the field, outplayed the Bucs. Stat-wise, the Bucs had a better game. But needless to say, the Cowboys were still up 6-3 late in the fourth quarter. So they almost won that game even with those bad stats. Of course, Tony Romo is going to help. So that's got to be just eating these Cowboys alive, the fact that they've had so many of these games, they've let so many of them slip out of their hands. And according to NFL Data Science Project, which is, you can find them at nflproject.com, prior to Tony Romo getting injured there in week 2 and heading into week 3 with their current 2-0 record, the Cowboys were 67% likely to make the playoffs. And that percentage slowly declined over the next few weeks, but prior to week 7, following the week 6 games, which saw a couple of their division rivals lose games that they should have won, Cowboys still had about a 29% chance to make the playoffs, but that percentage has dropped dramatically over the last couple of games. And right now, they don't really stand a chance at all to make the playoffs based upon the percentages and their remaining schedule, even if they get Tony Romo back. So definitely I'm going to be looking out for the Cowboys because how close these games have been, because how they may have been able to win some of these games, and because of the fact that when you put in Tony Romo and take out Brandon Whedon or take out Matt Castle, it's not just the passing game that improves. It's the running game. It's the pass blocking. It's the defense. It's the field position. Everything on that team depends upon a good quarterback. And it makes just a massive ripple effect across the stats and the rest of the units on that field for the Dallas Cowboys. So there's a lot of things that would be improved with Tony Romo in there. And I'm looking to, take the fact that they're not going to do anything in terms of playoff chances the rest of this season, but they're going to be a team that you're going to need to look out for, and I'm probably going to be on these guys a little bit. Story number 3, what the Arizona Cardinals did in Seattle was nothing short of making history. It was also nothing short of extremely impressive. I won't bury the lead here. No team in NFL history ever went to Seattle and lost the turnover battle, but still gained at least 450 yards and scored at least 39 points until Arizona did it last night. Now, we know the Seahawks haven't always been the same team that they are, but it's a very remote location. They've had decent teams over the years, and it's hard for opponents to play there. And no team has ever done what what the Arizona Cardinals did. If you look at some of these stats from the game, forget the high-level stats I just mentioned, Arizona recorded 30 first downs and controlled the clock for 39 minutes. 39 out of the 60 minutes. That left Seattle with just 21 minutes time of possession in that game. It was absolute total domination. Now, the score on the scoreboard ended up getting a lot closer there into the third and fourth quarter in the second half, but that was because of the turnovers from the Cardinals. The Cardinals were -3 in turnovers. One of those was returned to the house by the Seahawks. Another one was initially ruled a touchdown on the field, but then they went back and reviewed it, and clearly Carson Palmer tripped up the defender on the 2-yard line. They scored, I think, the next play or the play after that. So basically 14 points were given. 14 out of 32 points were given to the Seattle Seahawks that they scored in that game. Arizona, just utter domination. And consider that they went to the Seahawks red zone 3 times, only converted once in the red zone. Did not score a single return touchdown. Yet they still put up 39 points in that game. Carson Palmer still recorded a 94 passer rating despite being sacked 3 times in a very difficult place to play. He still completed 60% of his passes for 334 yards. They were able to run the ball for 3.5 yards per carry, which is not impressive, but it is taking away time that Seattle had to work with. And it still is moving the chains slightly, if not efficiently. It's at least being effective in certain spots. So, very impressive performance by the Arizona Cardinals. I don't think we can understate that enough. And it's clear that we've got a very strong two-headed monster over in the NFC between the Carolina Panthers and the Arizona Cardinals, who ironically met in the playoffs last season, albeit it was without Carson Palmer. And the last time that the Arizona Cardinals went up to Seattle, they didn't have Carson Palmer either. They had Drew Stanton in at quarterback, and they also didn't have Larry Fitzgerald, and they got absolutely smoked 19-3. They go back this year, they bring Carson Palmer, they bring Larry Fitzgerald, and they absolutely paced the Seattle Seahawks at home. So that game, if they do meet again in Carolina in the postseason, is going to have a distinctly different tone if they have a healthy Carson Palmer there and the rest of their pieces are okay as well. Story number 4, the Eagles play calling in the second half. The Eagles entered the second half with a lead against the Miami Dolphins last week. And I said on this podcast that I actually thought that the Miami Dolphins are going to have a great shot in this game. I thought that there was a great shot that the Miami Dolphins would be up at halftime. And I thought there was a great shot that the Miami Dolphins would be able to continue to run the football, which is what they needed to do, and have a great shot in this game. Now, the Miami Dolphins were not up at halftime, but they did cover the first half spread, and they obviously won the game outright. So if you look at this game, I just said they weren't up at halftime, so the Eagles had a halftime lead. It wasn't until the fourth quarter that the Miami Dolphins scored to take the lead in this game. So for over most of the second half, the Philadelphia Eagles played with a lead. Yet look at what they did in terms of their play calling in the second half. In the second half, they called 28 passes. They had DeMarco Murray run the ball 10 times, and Ryan Matthews run the ball 3 times. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that they went extremely pass heavy despite the fact that they had a lead. They went extremely pass heavy with Mark Sanchez, who attempted 23 passes in that second half. They went extremely pass heavy despite the fact that they were being very inefficient with their passing. Mark Sanchez had a passer rating of only 63. He only passed for 6.8 yards per attempt in that game. He came off the bench because Sam Bradford was injured, and he was obviously clearly not as prepared as he needed to be in that game, did not take the first team reps, and it was a distinct setback to put him in the game at that point in time. Now, the other thing is what I've always discussed before. Why is DeMarco Murray getting so many carries? As I just mentioned, Murray had 10 carries. How many yards did he gain on those 10 carries? 13 yards. That's 1.3 yards per attempt. Guess who gained more yards than DeMarco Murray? Ryan Matthews. On just 3 carries, Ryan Matthews gained more yards than DeMarco gained on 10 carries. I have no clue what Chip Kelly continues to do with riding DeMarco Murray, but for the fact that it would show that he made a mistake by paying DeMarco Murray that much money. The fact of the matter is this. If Chip Kelly continues to call DeMarco Murray to be the lead back for this team, and keep in mind, this was a game that, and I didn't talk to Evan Silva this week, but I listened to a lot of different DFS podcasts, and I could not disagree more with all the people out there who were riding DeMarco Murray this week. They were saying this is going to be DeMarco Murray's breakout game on the ground. They were saying how bad the Miami Dolphins run defense is and how big of a day DeMarco Murray is going to have on the ground. Now, DeMarco Murray, he made most of his damage through the air in that game. And I don't know that statistically he actually had a bad game there. He actually had an okay game in this game from a statistics perspective with regard to his fantasy production, because he had 58 yards through the air in receiving and he had 61 yards rushing. However, I mentioned that the only way that he'd have a good game is because of the volume, because Chip Kelly is clueless about actually distributing the carries properly. And sure enough, DeMarco Murray did not have a single touchdown in that game. And his 61 yards rushing came on 22 attempts. That was 2.77 yards per carry. So against one of the NFL's worst run defenses in the Miami Dolphins, DeMarco Murray did absolutely zilch on the ground in terms of being efficient or effective whatsoever. Yet Chip Kelly continues to ride him and rely upon him, instead of getting Ryan Matthews the carries that he needs to. I mean, in the second half, stats speak for themselves. 3 carries, 14 yards, that's 4.7 yards per carry. More yards on those 3 carries than DeMarco Murray had on 10 carries. And they decide to pass the ball 28 times, and Ryan Matthews gets 3 carries in that second half. Obviously, that's not the recipe for success. And until Chip Kelly wakes up, I have absolutely no confidence in backing the Philadelphia Eagles in spots where you think that they should be able to earn a victory or they're favored because of the way that they're utilizing DeMarco Murray. And this game against Tampa is going to be extremely, extremely intriguing to me. Extremely intriguing. The reason why is as follows. The Bucs actually have a pretty good run defense. Their pass defense is what's been extremely susceptible. Over the course of the season, their pass defense has been suspect, but their run defense has been very good. They just held the Dallas Cowboys on 21 attempts to a total of 42 yards. That's 2 yards per carry. So this run defense, I really believe, is going to crush DeMarco Murray. So number one, I would not be starting DeMarco Murray if you can avoid it in DFS next week, thinking that he's going to have a bounce back game or some type of performance. I don't see that happening. But more so, until they start involving Ryan Matthews more, this is a decent spot to fade the Philadelphia Eagles in my estimation. Not that I have much confidence in the Tampa Bay Bucs, and we'll have to check out the injury status of some of their players offensively. They need some of those weapons in there. They need 100% Austin Seferi-Jenkins. They need Vincent Jackson. And so with guys out that are critical like that, I may not be on the Bucs, but there's no chance that I would be wanting to do anything with the Eagles when I know that they cannot run the football and they're going up against a team who is good at stopping the run, that's going to force all the pressure onto, if it's Mark Sanchez most likely. And while I think Mark Sanchez would be a breath of fresh air compared to what we've seen from Sam Bradford, and might do some good things for that offense, it's worth a shot. I don't know that I have a ton of confidence in his ability in this game. So it'll be an interesting game to continue to break down. We'll obviously get into a lot more detail on that game later this week when we do the Saturday edition of the podcast with Evan Silva. Story number 5. I know we've got a lot of stories here, but I wanted to go ahead and give you guys some of this good information because I've been looking into it. But one of the things that I really was fascinated with was the coordinator moves this past offseason. And one of the guys, well, I'll go ahead and mention 3 guys at different position groups that have done tremendous, tremendous jobs this year. The best move on the offense coordinator by far, in my opinion, has been Adam Gase. His impact to the Chicago Bears over what Mark Trestman was doing there in his last year has almost been immeasurable. The way that this team is playing, I was down on them having played a cupcake schedule of opposing defenses, but they went into St. Louis, into the Lions' den, and absolutely were extremely efficient without their starting running back, Matt Forte. They were extremely productive and extremely efficient. So, kudos to what Adam Gase has done there. Out in Denver, this is going to be an extreme challenge for Wade Phillips. That defense did not look very good against the Kansas City Chiefs last week. They were without some of their key contributors, and I think they're going to be without Ward this week. But that defense is going to be under a lot more pressure now, considering the potential benching of Peyton Manning due to injury, as they say, and the starting of Brock Osweiler. It's going to take some adjustment for Osweiler. Some people could say, well, he couldn't do much worse than Peyton Manning, and while that may be true, there are times that Peyton Manning is doing things before the snap that's helping that team win or is helping that team get into great positioning, and that comes with experience. And so Brock Osweiler doesn't really have that experience. So it's going to be a challenge for that offense, although they might be a little bit better on some of their deeper passing with Osweiler in there. But Wade Phillips on the defensive side of the ball, he made a massive impact over what Jack Del Rio was doing out there. And so he once again has another big challenge of trying to win games by use of their defense and limiting offensive mistakes. And then I'll go ahead and throw out one other name that I think has made a huge impact on this team so far this season, where most people would probably not even contemplate this unit or this position group, and that's Bill Callahan with the Washington Redskins. The Washington Redskins right now, they're 4-5. They're right behind the New York Giants in the NFC East. But that offensive line has played tremendously well, both in the run game and as impressively, or perhaps more impressively, in the passing game, with trying to keep Kirk Cousins clean in the pocket. That offensive line has done a great job so far this season. And it's not as if they've done it against a super cupcake schedule either. They did play the Rams earlier this season. So that's obviously a very difficult team to have to go ahead and face and to defend. They played the Jets. They played the Patriots. They played the Eagles. They played the Dolphins in week 1 when they were fully healthy. So, they've played a number of very good defensive fronts so far this season. And they've held up extremely well. So now they've got to go up against yet another very difficult defensive front in this game against the Carolina Panthers this upcoming week. I'm going to be fascinated to see how this game plays out. But if Bill Callahan can work some more miracles and get that offensive line to protect a little bit for Kirk Cousins in this game, the Redskins might have a decent chance to make some noise in this game, in my estimation. That game against the Tennessee Titans last week was a difficult game. The Titans really suffered in terms of their ability to protect the passer throughout the course of the season, and they were only sacked one time by the Carolina Panthers in that game. They got after Cam Newton and sacked Cam 5 times. So the big concern had been, how are we going to protect our quarterbacks? They keep getting destroyed. But when they put Marcus Mariota in there and decided we're going to protect the passer, they truly did that. The issue for the Tennessee Titans was, with injured wide receivers, who do they have running routes except for Delaney Walker? They don't really have a whole lot of experience there running routes. For the Redskins, that's a little bit different. If they can keep Kirk Cousins somewhat upright in this game, they do have guys that are capable of running routes. They do have guys that are capable of getting open. Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson, Jordan Reed. Those 3 guys right there are some elite ability pass catchers. I guess maybe I'm using the elite word too kindly, but they are decent, well above average guys in terms of catching the ball, reliable targets. So those are guys that could make some noise, far better than the best 3 receivers, let's say, that the Tennessee Titans had to work with. And in that game, Marcus Mariota, he still completed 7.4 yards per attempt and 67% of his passes. So it's not as if Marcus Mariota had a terrible day. He did not throw a touchdown and did throw an interception, so that wasn't good. But in terms of his yards per pass attempt, in terms of his completion percentage, neither of those were very bad. In fact, both those were top 10 of any quarterback in the NFL last week. So, interesting game coming up this weekend. Last but not least, before we start breaking down these games, I want to go over several of these key stats that I like to look at and share a couple of the results with you. The first one, of course, is early down passing. How do these quarterbacks perform efficiently on first and second downs at avoiding third down? And the first guy on this list is a guy whose coordinator I just mentioned a second ago, and that's what Adam Gase has been doing with the offense of the Chicago Bears. Chicago went into St. Louis, into the Dome, to play a very good Rams defense, a defense who was ranked number 1 in red zone defense and top 5 in basically every defensive metric. And Jay Cutler went 16 of 18. It's 89% completions, 240 yards at 13.3 yards per attempt, with 3 touchdowns and no interceptions and no sacks against the St. Louis Rams on first and second down passing. That is a perfect 158.3 passer rating. Extremely effective, extremely impressive was Jay Cutler. Kirk Cousins, a guy who I just discussed, he was number 2 on early down passing. He went 16 of 19 for 255 yards 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, a 153.8 passer rating, albeit he did it at home against the Saints. A guy who was impressive, though he didn't do it against a good team, a good defense, but he did it with an injury, and he did it as the backup, and that was Ben Roethlisberger. Comes off the bench, 20 of 27 for 360 yards on first and second down passing. 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Extremely impressive day for him. And then, last but not least, before you look at some of the guys who struggled, and I'll discuss Cam Newton. Cam Newton, I mentioned how the Titans' defense was without 2 of their starting cornerbacks, and Cam Newton took advantage of that on early down passing. He went 16 of 20 for only 9.2 yards per attempt. It's still good, but it's not as good as those other guys, with 1 touchdown, no interceptions, and a 122 passer rating. So his day was the 4th best of any quarterback on first and second down passing. Guys who struggled, of course, Peyton Manning. 5 of 13, 35 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He is now benched. Nick Foles, 10 of 22 for 4.9 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 1 interception. He is now benched. Derek Carr was surprising. That Minnesota Vikings defense, a little bit better potentially game than we expected, although I didn't do anything with that game, side or total. I was surprised that Derek Carr struggled as much as he did against the Vikings. He went only 19 of 30 for 194 yards, which is 6.5 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 54 passer rating. Matt Castle, 13 of 20, 117 yards at 5.9 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 1 interception on first and second down passing, and he is now benched as well in favor of Tony Romo. So the guys that struggled tremendously on this list are guys that were starters that are now getting benched or were backups, and then Derek Carr is kind of sitting in the middle there with just a really, really terrible week on early down passing. A couple other guys that I'll mention that are on this list near the bottom, and that was Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton was down there. We know that he lost the game last night and did not look very good. Well, how bad did he look on first and second downs? He was 17 of 25, which is 68%, only 5.2 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and was sacked twice. So not a good game for Dalton on the early downs. How about deep passing? Well, deep passing, let's just mention a couple guys here. Ben Roethlisberger and Carson Palmer at the top of this list. Almost identical passer ratings from them, 147 and 146. Ben had much better yards per attempt at 24 yards per attempt. Carson Palmer was at 15.5. Both obviously exceptional numbers, but Carson Palmer had 2 touchdowns. Ben only had 1. And so Ben slightly eked out Palmer, but both of those guys with extremely tremendous performances on deep passes down the field. Guys that struggled the most, well, Peyton Manning, obviously, he went 0 of 7 on his deep pass attempts. But interestingly, a last name I'll mention on here was Blake Bortles. You know, the game against the Ravens, we're going to discuss that in great detail when we break this game down, but Bortles only went 2 of 8 on deep passes. He only completed them for 4.8 yards per attempt and a 7.3 passer rating because he also had an interception there. So Bortles, that was his calling card. That was one thing the Jaguars were doing extremely effectively, was throwing the ball deep down the field, and they actually won the game against the Baltimore Ravens without that. I'll get into some details to why I think they actually won that game. They certainly didn't win it on the stat sheet. They were outplayed by the Baltimore Ravens, but turnovers helped them win that game. And then Andy Dalton, the last guy, I'll go ahead and throw in there because his stats are almost identical to Blake Bortles. Also 2 of 8, 5.8 yards per attempt, no touchdowns and 1 interception on his deep passing. So he took a lot of shots down the field, just was not effective at connecting on virtually all of them. So that was a struggle and one of the reasons why he looked more like the BB gun as opposed to the rifle. Let's look really quickly at scoring zone passing. And guys that were in the scoring zone a lot and that were extremely effective were Kirk Cousins and Jay Cutler. Once again, both those guys had very good passer ratings inside the scoring zone. Joe Flacco did as well. Flacco 3 of 3 with 3 touchdowns inside the scoring zone. He actually had a perfect passer rating. So he was the best of the NFL last week. Guys who struggled in the scoring zone, Nick Foles, Derek Carr, names that we've mentioned previously. But an interesting one, Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel was asked to throw the ball 16 times inside the Steelers' 25-yard line. That was the most pass attempts of any quarterback inside the scoring zone, inside the opponent's 25-yard line. He only recorded a 54 passer rating on those passes, connected on 50% of them, only 3.7 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. So that's a look at some of your scoring zone. Let's really quickly look at some of the rushing, short yardage rushing effectiveness. One interesting number jumps off the page to me, and it's a team that actually won the game on the road against the Jets, but it's for a bad reason that's jumping off the page. The Buffalo Bills had 9 plays where they needed to gain just between 1 and 3 yards, and they gained first downs only 22% of those times. So 2 out of those 9 plays were they actually able to convert first down, yet they still won the game against the Jets. That's extreme. That was the worst effectiveness in terms of conversion percentage into first down of any team in the league, and they tried it 9 times. So a big problem for them. Similarly, like the New Orleans Saints, they had 8 attempts. They actually converted 4 of them, but it still was one of the worst ranks in the league in terms of conversion percentages on third or second and short in terms of total opportunities. Now, in terms of teams that did great in this stat, not many teams actually attempted a lot of these runs, but I will say the Bucs, very impressive with what they did in short down running. They ran the ball on 5 plays where they needed to gain between 1 and 3 yards, and 4 of them were converted into first down, one of which was a touchdown. That's an 80% conversion rate. The only other team to top 80% with at least 3 attempts was the Seattle Seahawks against the Arizona Cardinals at home on Sunday night. They converted all 4 of their short yardage rushing attempts into first downs. And with that said, let's go ahead and jump into breaking down some of these games. First up, let's go ahead and jump into the Monday night game that we just saw, which was the Bengals versus the Texans. Obviously, a terrible game from Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton recorded a 59 passer rating in this one with 1 interception, no touchdown passes, only 58% completions and 4.8 yards per attempt. 4.8 yards per attempt, worst of any quarterback in the league last week. The team as a whole converted only 29% of their third downs, which was one of the worst marks in the league last week. They had 16 first downs, the same number of first downs as the Texans, but they went to third down 14 times, so a very terrible ratio there. Yards per play, only 4.1. That was second worst in the league. Only the Jaguars had a worse yards per play rank. So it was just a bad performance from the Bengals across the board. They couldn't really run effectively. They were terrible on third down. Now that's been the calling card for the Houston Texans, is their third down defense, and they lived up to that. But a lot of teams have been bypassing that by being productive and efficient on the early downs against this Texans team, setting themselves up for either third and shorts or skipping third down altogether. And that's the best way to avoid going up against a defense who can stop you on third down well, is just to avoid that down by being productive and efficient on first and second down. But as I mentioned, Bengals terrible in that regard, went to third down a lot, and they really struggled from that respect. Andy Dalton could not complete any of his deep passes, and that really didn't open things up at all for that offense. Conversely, from the Texans, not a very good day running the game at all, 3.3 yards per attempt. They themselves went to third down 15 times, so even more third down attempts than the Cincinnati Bengals. Both teams got to the red zone only once, didn't convert into a touchdown when they were down there. Just a bad game from the Texans, too. Nothing impressive whatsoever. In fact, the 52% completion percentage was even worse than Andy Dalton's. The 5.3 yards per attempt, slightly better, but still pretty terrible. 64 passer rating from their quarterbacks combined. Both quarterbacks were sacked 3 times. So overall, just a very poor performance from both of these teams, which led to a very uninspiring football game. At least it was close, but it was not very exciting to watch. Let's jump all the way back to the first primetime game that we saw this week between the Jets and the Bills. If you can remember that game, it was another game that was pretty uninspiring, pretty ugly to watch. It was a lower scoring game, although more high scoring than this last one. That game ended 22-17 with the Bills pulling out the victory in New York quite impressively. But the fact of the matter is the Jets had 4 turnovers in that game. The Bills took one of them back for a non-offensive touchdown. but neither offense performed extremely well. Both teams were able to control the ball and turn to the ground game to try to run the football. The Jets gained 5.3 yards per attempt. The Bills gained 4.5 yards per attempt. Both of those were top 6 of any team in the league this past weekend. Both teams terrible inside the red zone. The Jets actually got there 3 times, only converted once. The Bills got there only 1 time and did not convert. But the Bills were able to maintain time of possession for the most part, 33 minutes time of possession. So still not overly dominant from that respect, but they were able to maintain time of possession more so than the Jets were. It's the turnovers, though. 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles lost from the Jets. That really cost them this game, in my opinion. Let's look at the game, one of the marquee games next, which was the Broncos at the Chiefs, where we saw Peyton Manning just completely unravel in this game. Just a disappointing performance across the board. In fact, Peyton Manning was one of, I think, 5 quarterbacks who recorded such terrible statistics. It's pretty hard to even put them into words, but guys that had 20-plus attempts with 5 or fewer completions, no touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, there's only 4 other guys who recorded that. Dan Pastrone in 72, Kim McQuicklin in 1975, Steve Meyer in 1977, and Warren Moon in 1986 when he was 30 years old playing with the Houston Oilers at that time. So Peyton Manning, obviously he joins that illustrious crowd of poor passing performances, and the Broncos couldn't do anything in this game in terms of converting anything through the air, which makes it extremely curious as to the fact we know that they were getting killed on the scoreboard. We know that they were down 10 points after the first half and 19 points at halftime. So why aren't they just simply trying to run the ball more when they're gaining 4.3 yards per rush? They decided to run the ball only 16 times. They passed the ball 44 times. So just poor ratio there, in my opinion. The Chiefs, on the other hand, very balanced. 32 rushes, 31 pass attempts. They sacked the Broncos 5 times. Obviously had 5 turnovers via interception that they got from the Broncos. So very strong performance from the Chiefs, who only recorded 13 first downs in this game. It was just a defensive surge, a defensive performance that got them the early lead in this one, and they basically just skated to hang on to it late. Let's jump to the Buccaneers against the Cowboys. This is a game I mentioned when I was running through the Cowboys schedule. This was one of the games I mentioned that the Cowboys, they lost this game, but it was very close at the end. But I said the stats were really in the Bucs' favor. The Cowboys didn't deserve to win this game. And that is 100% true. If you look at the stats, the Bucs had 23 first downs in this game. The Cowboys only had 12. So they almost had double the number of first downs as Dallas did. They only went to third down 12 times. So they bypassed third down a lot in this game. Meanwhile, the Cowboys, 12 first downs, but 13 third down attempts in this one. So very inefficient. And when you look at Dallas from a rushing standpoint, they were held to only 2 yards per carry. Now, the other offensive metrics for the Bucs, not overly impressive in terms of a yards per rush. They only gained 3.2 yards per rush. Yards per pass, only 6.3 yards per pass. So those numbers weren't very good. They still were better than the Cowboys, but still not very good overall when you compare their overall performance. This was a very defensive-oriented game where teams were playing not to lose more so than really trying to go ultra aggressive and try to get the victory by putting up a ton of points on the scoreboard. The Bucs lost the turnover battle. Jameis Winston threw 2 interceptions, which he obviously cannot do, and so that was the main difference in this game. Was the turnovers were giving the Cowboys life, but offensively the Cowboys were not able to do very much against this Bucs defense. The Eagles and the Dolphins, this is a game that I said I believe that the Dolphins might be able to get some things done running the football. And they weren't overly impressive doing so, but they did gain 99 rushing yards. This is a game where I was liking the potential prospect of Lamar Miller. And Lamar Miller did not have a bad game in this game. He did pretty much okay in this spot when you look at some of his statistics. But overall, this was a game that I felt the Eagles, though they jumped out to a big lead, they were not able to pull away. Their quarterback performance was holding them back in this game and really prevented them from getting much accomplished. They were not able to run the football very well. If you look at the Eagles' rushing yards, they only gained 2.3 yards per attempt. They tried to run the ball 36 times. They were just running a lot of DeMarco Murray. They were just running very ineffectively, and they ran most of those attempts in the first half. In the second half, they went extremely pass heavy. They called 48 pass plays in the second half, and they were not very successful in those pass plays in terms of picking up the required yardages, converting on third downs. This team only converted 39% of their third downs, and so as a result, it was just a very difficult game for the Philadelphia Eagles on offense. DeMarco Murray, as I mentioned earlier, only 61 total rushing yards in this game. Not very strong numbers there. Lamar Miller, only 16 rush attempts, but 43 yards on those 16 attempts. He also caught 6 passes for 50 yards and a touchdown. So very effective performance from him in terms of production. And Jarvis Landry was another guy who I thought might be able to exploit the Philadelphia Eagles pass defense. He caught 7 passes. He scored a touchdown, 52 receiving yards. So an effective performance from Jarvis Landry as well in that game. The Giants and the Patriots, we talked about this game in great detail. The big difference here is the fact that the Giants went 1 of 5 inside the red zone. And I mentioned that I was going to come back to a topic regarding their decision to throw the ball on 2nd and 5 with only 2 minutes and 10 seconds left. You know, this is a case where I don't see Bill Belichick making the same type of error. But Tom Coughlin has an absolutely terrible, absolutely mind-boggling, ridiculous record in close games decided by 3 points, close games decided by 6 points. Whatever your cutoff point is on close games, Coughlin is one of, if not the worst in the NFL. And he showed it again this week. I mean, you might think, oh, well, he looked good there deciding to fall down and not having Eli Manning throw the ball and force the Patriots to use their last time out there when it was third down. They decided to kick the field goal. But this is the problem. They should never have passed the ball down the field as far as he did to Dwayne Harris. It was an 18-yard pass on 2nd and 5 from the Patriots' 23-yard line. New England had just burned their second to last timeout. They would get the 2-minute warning, and they would get they could call a timeout on third down. There's absolutely no reason why on 2nd and 5 you don't try to run the football and live with the results. New England has to call their third timeout. They would be left with no more timeouts. Then all you need to do on that third down is simply get a first down. Maybe you gain 1 or 2 yards on that 2nd and 5. So now you've got a 3rd and short. The playbook is open to you because it's going to be the 2-minute warning anyways. So the 2-minute warning is there whether you pass or you run. So you might as well call out your most effective play. It does not matter. There's going to be the 2-minute warning. And you try to gain a first down and end the game with kneel downs and kicking the field goal. That's all you needed to do for the New York Giants. Instead, what do? They decide to call this ultra-aggressive pass play on 2nd and 5. It's completed all the way down to the 5-yard line. There's still over 2 minutes left in the game. And now, even if you score a touchdown, the New England Patriots still have an opportunity in that game. So there was just no winning in that type of situation. There's still the 2-minute warning plus the timeout, and there's no opportunity to gain another first down. So unless there's a defensive penalty, New England is getting the ball back. The Patriots are getting the ball back regardless, and they're going to have the opportunity to utilize Tom Brady and drive down the field against a team in the Giants who was not able to bring a ton of a pass rush, especially if they're playing prevent defense, which they would have been on that final drive, which they ultimately did. So it's just a shame that there is a lack of competence and lack of intelligence for the New York Giants. This team's 5-5. They could be a lot better this season. They did win a game that they should not have won, as I already mentioned, in Dallas when they were +4 in turnovers and scored 2 non-offensive touchdowns and won only by 7 points. However, there was other games earlier in the year that they lost due to incompetence, and this was another game that I would put into that same category as well. Yes, they went 1 of 5 inside the red zone, but I would argue that with the opportunity that presented itself to them at the end, if they had called plays a little bit more intelligently, they would have been able to win that game. The Packers and the Lions, this game really was a story on inefficiency on 1st and 2nd down. when these teams got into their opponent's red zone, they never walked away without a touchdown. There was a total in this game of 4 trips to the red zone, 2 by each team. All 4 times were converted into touchdowns. However, there was only 4 total trips into the red zone in this entire game. And part of that was because of these teams on first and second down being completely inefficient and ineffective. Neither team could run the football whatsoever. It was a disaster. The Packers only ran 18 times, gained 2.6 yards per carry. They basically abandoned the run. They called 61 pass plays, only ran the ball 18 times. A ridiculous, ridiculous ratio, even though there was never any point in this game where they were down by more than 9 points. And at the end of the second quarter, the game was tied. At the end of the third quarter, they were only down by 6 points. So why are they deciding to abandon the run the way that they did? I know they're only gaining 2.6 yards per carry, but guess what? The Detroit Lions only gained 1.7 yards per carry, but they still ran the ball 26 times. They passed the ball 38 times, a much healthier ratio there. With the Packers throwing the ball so much, it gave the Lions opportunities to rush the passer, and sure enough, 3 sacks from the Lions on Aaron Rodgers, no sacks from the Packers on Matthew Stafford. And that was only one part of the difference here. And the Lions even had a turnover on the Matthew Stafford interception. But when you look at some of the first down and third down attempts, you see that the Lions had 16 first downs and 16 third down attempts. The Packers, 22 first downs, 19 third down attempts. So these guys were going to third down a lot in this game because they weren't efficient or effective on first down. They punted the ball a total of 16 times in this game. Just a very bad game to watch. And I know I didn't get into a lot of detail about the struggles of the Green Bay Packers and Mike McCarthy's team and the offensive play calling that he's now relieved himself of this season, and has his offensive coordinator making those play calls and how that whole thing is working out. We'll maybe touch on that at a future time. We just ran out of time, but very concerning things going on in Green Bay right now. Very inefficient, and that is exposing that defense. I said in the offseason there was no team that should have been in the playoffs with a defense the way that the Packers defense looked last season. Based on the metrics, based on the early down success rate that they had, they were absolutely abhorrent from that perspective. Yet they were in the playoffs only because of the ridiculous, out-of-this-world season that Aaron Rodgers delivered in 2014. And here he is in 2015. He's without Jordy Nelson, and he's not being nearly as efficient. And that's showing more warts from their defense. They're coming to light, and their offense is not being productive enough to overcome those issues right now, and that's showing up in the win-loss column. A team in that same division with a massively, massively important game against the Packers this weekend is the Minnesota Vikings. I cannot wait to see this game. They flexed it back to a late start at 4:25, which is good for them because there only are a few late games this week. There's only 3 total late games this week, and one of the games that we're going to see at 4:25 is San Francisco versus Seattle. That game should be very boring. So this Green Bay-Minnesota game is going to be the game of interest in the afternoon. And the Minnesota Vikings are a team, I've mentioned this before, I took them over their season win total. I'm not very impressed with the way that they're performing this season. I've not been impressed at all with Teddy Bridgewater and his development so far this season. I expected him to come along a lot further off of what he was doing last season. But here's the thing about Teddy Bridgewater. It's almost impossible for him to play much worse. Now, I don't really respect the schedule that they've played so far this year. I believe that the schedule that they've played has been pretty easy for the most part. When you look at some of the metrics coming into this game this past weekend, I showed them having gone up against the number 25 rated opposing defenses and literally the easiest schedule for their defense against opposing offenses. So that's why I thought the Raiders may have some semblance of a chance in this game, though I was not on it from a side or totals perspective. But the Vikings come out and were able to run the ball through this Raiders defense and just control the clock and control the outcome of this game. And that defense, shockingly, was very effective and very disruptive on the Oakland Raiders, and they didn't necessarily do that by recording a lot of sacks. They only recorded 2 sacks in this game, but they made Derek Carr very uncomfortable with their coverages. They forced him into 2 interceptions. Derek Carr only had an 82 passer rating in this game, only totaled 287 yards despite throwing the ball 43 times. So a very incredibly strong performance from the Vikings. And when I'm looking at this Vikings team throughout the course of the season, yes, their schedule is going to pose some daunting games along the way. But here's the interesting element for this team. I said it before, one of the reasons I like their season win total over is you give Norv Turner a solid athletic tight end like Kyle Rudolph, who's finally healthy. You give Norv Turner a strong running back like Adrian Peterson, who started the season off extremely slow against San Francisco, but is obviously hitting his stride right now. We'll see how long that lasts, but assume he's okay. And you give this team a deep threat like Mike Wallace. Now you've got a young stud like Stephon Diggs who's really breaking out. And you've got some other pieces at receiver that can catch the ball. You have a team that has a lot of the pieces like what Norv Turner had down in Dallas when he was making some noise with the Cowboys with a good tight end, a strong run game, and a couple wide receivers. Now, I won't say that these guys are anywhere near the overall skill level of the triplets and the players that the Cowboys had during the era when they were winning all the Super Bowls, but it's much different than what Teddy Bridgewater had, and you can't imagine Bridgewater playing much worse than he has year to date. So if you assume that he plays a little bit better down the stretch, you give him that defense, you give him that run game, he plays a little bit better, this Vikings team could make some noise, even though I kind of am still skeptical. I'm coming to terms with the fact that this team might be better overall than I even thought if Bridgewater plays well. That's a big if, but if Bridgewater plays well, this team could be a difficult out for anybody in the NFC. The Rams and the Bears, this was a surprising game. We touched on it earlier, so I won't get into too much detail, but wow, Jay Cutler, 10.2 yards per attempt, 149 passer rating, and a 79% completion rate in St. Louis against that defense. I know that St. Louis was terrible offensively. I know that they benched Nick Foles because he only completed 5.2 yards per attempt, had a 51 passer rating, threw an interception, and looked terrible overall, despite the fact that the Rams had a better performance from their running game in terms of 4.5 yards per carry versus the Bears only gaining 4.1 yards per carry. Look, the fact of the matter is this game, in my opinion, was not lost because that offense wasn't productive enough for the Rams. It was lost because of how that team relies so much on their defense to play well to allow their run game to be effective and to be able to call as many run plays as they can. And the Bears offense just worked that defense completely. The Bears offense, this I said before how this defense for the Rams was so good in the red zone, and they actually still were in this game. They still held the Bears to only 33% conversions inside the red zone. But it was because of how good the Bears were up and down the field that they got into the Rams red zone 6 times in this game. 6 times. I mean, when Jay Cutler has a day like he did with 10.2 yards per attempt and a 149 passer rating in this offense on the road against the Rams, that tells you Adam Gase knows what the hell he's doing with this team. Very impressive performance from that respect. The Ravens and the Jaguars, where do we start with this game? Blake Bortles comes into this game being very effective, being very efficient on his deep passing, and he was miserable on his deep passing. The Jacksonville Jaguars were only gaining 3.7 yards per pass attempt. It was second worst of any quarterback in the league. Only the Broncos with Peyton Manning were worse than what Blake Bortles recorded in Baltimore. We've said before how Baltimore very good coming out of the bye, and they did come out pretty well in this game overall, but I took the Jaguars in this game. I took them plus the points, and I didn't necessarily think that they could win this game outright, and as it turns out, they likely shouldn't have won the game outright. They did win this game by 2 points. They were down 19-20 late in the game, and there was the face mask that was called that the player was not set properly for the Jaguars, and that play technically should never have happened, and they should have never gotten the 15-yard penalty, and the Jaguars should have never had the opportunity to kick that field goal to win the game. But there's water under the bridge at this point in time. They got that done, but regardless, this game that came down to the struggles of the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens fumbled twice, threw 2 interceptions, and despite all of that, throwing 2 interceptions, Joe Flacco still recorded a 97 pass rating, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 76% completions. That was the 4th best of any quarterback in the league this past week. A very good performance off the bye from Joe Flacco and this Baltimore Ravens team. They converted 57% of their third downs in this game. That was the best of any team in the league this past week. So very strong performance. Both teams were pretty effective running the football, 4.2 yards per carry from the Ravens, 4.1 yards per carry for the Jaguars. And that is one element that surprised me slightly. I anticipated both run games were not going to be as productive as they were, which is going to force the ball more into the quarterback's hands. Now, sure enough, I mean, don't get me mistaken, the quarterbacks in both cases had 45 pass attempts, double what they had in terms of run attempts, where the Ravens had 21 and the Jaguars had 22. So they were definitely twice as pass heavy as they were run heavy, but the passing of the Jaguars was very ineffective, yet they're still able to walk away with victory despite gaining only 3.7 yards per play. That tells you this game really was determined by the turnovers from the Raiders. A game where there was just total domination from one team, and it ended up showing up on the scoreboard, was the Redskins versus the Saints. The Redskins made 6 trips into the Saints red zone, converted half of them, 23 first downs, only went to third down 11 times, 55% completions or conversion rate when they did go to third down. Kirk Cousins threw a perfect passer rating in this game. An outstanding performance from Kirk Cousins, outstanding performance on the ground running the football. Here's the concern I have for the Redskins in this game. I mean, we obviously saw a ton of points in this game, and surprisingly, remarkably, the Saints, despite gaining 6.4 yards per play, despite gaining 6.3 yards per run, only got down to the Redskins red zone one time, and they only put up 14 points on the board at the end of the day. So that was a bit of an anomaly, I think, and those are things you got to look into when you're looking at this upcoming game with the Redskins and the Carolina Panthers, because if the Redskins are going to allow the Saints, of all people, who I believe in the game prior to this ran for only 2.2 yards per carry, to come out and on the road run for 6.3 yards per carry, you can imagine what the Carolina Panthers are going to be able to do running the football against this Redskins defense. So the Redskins either need to figure out a way to patch up that run defense, or they're going to get destroyed in terms of time of possession, whenever the Carolina Panthers have the football. But conversely, when the Redskins are getting the pass protection like they're getting, and when they're getting the blocking like they're getting, it's difficult to stop this team when Kirk Cousins does not throw interceptions, does not turn the ball over, and they can run the ball effectively. This is a team that can play above their heads in those situations, and that's exactly what they saw this past weekend. So it'll be very interesting to see that game next week. I already touched on this next game briefly, so I'll just highlight a couple of stats in the Seattle Seahawks versus Arizona Cardinals game. I touched on basically everything that the Cardinals did in terms of offensively, with how incredible a performance it was. I'll mention the fact that the Seattle Seahawks, though they had such a limited time of possession, they did basically pass the ball twice as much as they ran the ball. And it's not that they were totally ineffective passing the ball, but they were very erratic. They hit on a number of big plays, which gained them 7.1 yards per attempt overall. But Russell Wilson completed only 44% of his passes. He was 14 of 32. So there are a lot of times when they were getting nothing out of that passing game whatsoever. Meanwhile, they decided to run the ball only 18 times, but almost outgained the Arizona Cardinals, who ran the ball 33 times. The Seattle Seahawks gained 6.4 yards per carry. So in hindsight, they probably should have run the ball a little bit more. That would enable them to control the clock a little bit better. They were running the ball extremely effectively, and they gained 6.6 yards per play in this game. So better yards per play than even the Arizona Cardinals had. Problem was, they were totally outclassed in terms of time of possession, in large part because of the fact that they were very inefficient on third down and did not call enough run plays. On third down, get this discrepancy here, this disparity. The Seattle Seahawks converted only 13% of their third downs, worst of any team in the league. That's a down in distance. That's a down that usually in Seattle, the Seahawks typically win that battle of third down conversions, because it's very hard to convert on third down with that crowd noise. But guess what? the Arizona Cardinals on the road with the crowd noise converted 47% of their third downs. So massive difference between the conversion rate of the Cardinals at 47% and the Seahawks at only 13%. That propelled the Seahawks to losing that game is their terrible conversion rate, even though they were +2 in turnover margin, even though they scored a non-offensive touchdown. When they can't convert on third downs and they're not running the football enough, then the Arizona Cardinals are going to be able to perform well, especially when they're passing the ball as well as they did in that game. Last two games up, the Steelers at the Browns and the Titans at the Panthers. Steelers at the Browns, both teams were very effective actually passing the football. Johnny Manziel comes into the game. He's asked to throw 45 pass attempts in this game. They only run it 14 times. You're putting a lot on the shoulders of Johnny Manziel on the road against the Steelers when you're only going to call 14 run plays. It's very difficult. 45 pass plays. That's 3 times more pass plays. Yet he converts 73% of his pass plays. That's 5th best in the league. 7.3 yards per attempt. That was 8th best in the league. And a 92 passer rating. So very strong performance there from the Cleveland Browns and Johnny Manziel. Very impressive to be able to do that on the road. To be honest with you, that story probably is not getting talked about quite enough. They did make some mistakes. They did have an interception. Obviously, he lost 2 fumbles. They had 3 total turnovers. Though they did get 2 takeaways, they still lost the turnover battle. This game really was never close, except in the first quarter, of course. The Steelers went into halftime with an 18-point lead on the shoulders of Ben Roethlisberger, really getting the job done with 10.8 yards per attempt and a 119 passer rating off the bench. Extremely productive performance, and I mentioned how well he performed on the first and second down passing, as well as on deep passing. Overall, despite the fact that neither team could run the football whatsoever, both run defenses shut down the other one. I know a lot of fantasy guys, I was not on them, but a lot of fantasy guys took D'Angelo Williams of the Steelers with Le'Veon Bell out, and they thought that D'Angelo Williams is going to be able to run through this Cleveland Browns defense. And I didn't have an ounce of D'Angelo Williams on any of my DFS rosters this past week. And the Steelers as a team ran 60 times for only 2.9 yards. They ran 21 times, 60 yards, 2.9 yards per attempt. Terrible number there. The Browns were only gaining 1.1 yards per attempt. So both teams were just taking to the air. Surprising that the Browns' run defense was able to step the game up as much as they did. But because of the fact, despite them only running for 2.9 yards per attempt, because they only ran the ball 21 times, the Steelers still averaged 7.8 yards per play, which was second best of any team in the league this week, thanks to their insane yards per pass attempt and their heavy passing game. They only punted 1 time as well. So strong performance from the Steelers, not a terrible performance from Johnny Manziel on the road. And last but not least, the Carolina Panthers versus the Tennessee Titans. This game, basically, if I was on the over in this game, and there was one of the totals that I liked, and if there was one more touchdown, it would have gotten there. But the Titans didn't get to the Panthers' red zone even 1 time. The Panthers got down to the Titans' red zone 5 times, converted 3 of those into touchdowns, had a couple of very short field goals, so they really fell short in a couple of their attempts to score touchdowns down there. However, the Carolina Panthers were really able to stop the Titans when they needed to. And the time of possession was massive. And that's one of the reasons and concerns that I would have for the Washington Redskins when they come down to Carolina this week is the time of possession. Carolina possessed this ball for 36 minutes. The Titans only had it for just over 24 minutes. Only 11 first downs for the Tennessee Titans. No team had fewer first downs in this game. They went to third down 12 times, so they weren't bypassing first downs, bypassing third downs often. And no trips to the red zone, obviously, as I mentioned. The interesting part about this was they actually got a lot of pressure on Cam Newton. They sacked him 5 times. I was thinking Cam Newton was going to be able to elude that pressure, but he still had a pretty good day despite limited passing. He only threw the ball 26 times, but he completed 81% of those pass attempts, which was best in the league against a defense that was banged up in the secondary. 109 passer rating in that game. So very good performance from Cam Newton, better than we've seen out of him recently from start to finish in a game. The game ended up just getting to be such a lead that Carolina started milking the clock, slowly running the football, and the Tennessee Titans just could not get off many plays. Tennessee only had 46 offensive plays in the game this past week. That is well below any other team in the league. In fact, I'm struggling to see a team that had 56 offensive plays. I think the Seattle Seahawks had 52. Otherwise, no other team had below 52 plays except for the Tennessee Titans. So they just did not have the ball. They could not get enough accomplished. They were going to third down far too often to make enough noise against the Carolina Panthers. All right, let's dig into some of these injuries here. First and foremost, at the quarterback position, we saw Peyton Manning go down with injury. He's got a partially torn right plantar fascia, which is extremely painful. Supposedly they're saying it's more debilitating than actually a full tear of that plantar fascia. So who knows how long Peyton Manning is going to be out for this one, but Brock Osweiler takes over while he is out. He's obviously going to start against the Chicago Bears as Brock Osweiler. Julian Edelman, he was lost for a number of weeks with a foot fracture. They're saying it's the fifth metatarsal in his left foot. He's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks. It's the same injury, actually, that sidelined Des Bryant for most of the first half of the season. He underwent surgery, put a screw in there, helped reduce the length of the injury. The Titans lost their second leading receiver, Justin Hunter, to an ankle fracture. He's put on IR. Giants put Victor Cruz on IR. He obviously wasn't injured in this game, but he's now been ruled out for the rest of the season. Another quarterback that was lost was Sam Bradford. He injured his shoulder. They say he's going to miss at least 2 games with a separated shoulder. So we're going to get an interesting taste to see Mark Sanchez with this offense. Mark Sanchez did a few good things last season and then a lot of bad things later on. But when he first got in there, he was definitely making a somewhat of a positive impact when Nick Foles was injured. So it'll be interesting to see how Sanchez steps up and plays. The good part, I think, for them is that they're saying it's a multi-week injury. So it's not like he thinks he's just going to be in there for one game and then he's going to go back to the bench. He knows that he's going to be in there for a couple weeks. So I think he'll approach it hopefully very intently on trying to potentially regain that job overall if he actually is playing extremely well and force Chip Kelly to make a difficult decision. The Rams lost their right guard, Jamon Brown, to a fractured lower leg. He's on IR. The Jaguars lost their defensive tackle, Senderick Marks. I believe he's on IR with a torn tricep. The Jaguars, one of their leading receivers, Allen Hurns, in a very dynamic offense. They say he strained his abdomen, and they're thinking that they're going to try to make him play this Thursday, which I would be shocked if he was able to do that, but we shall see. He was supposedly seeing an abdominal specialist, so we'll see how he's able to come back. Michael Floyd of the Arizona Cardinals, he strained his hamstring. We're not sure what or how long he's going to be out right now. Cam Chancellor, that was a collision that he had with Mike Upati. Mike Upati left the game, but he looks like he's going to be all right. Chiefs dime safety Tyvon Branch, he left the game with a foot injury. The Dolphins, they saw Bryce McCain, their cornerback, and their linebacker Jelani Jenkins both left the game on Sunday with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Rams, Jeremy Zuttah, he came back and he started, but he aggravated a sprained shoulder against the Jaguars. He left in the fourth quarter, so losing a center is obviously never a good thing. Seahawks Bruce Irvin suffered a sprained MCL against the Cardinals. That's an injury that's going to hurt them significantly there because he's one of the better pass rushers that they have. The Steelers lost Landry Jones, of course. He was supposed to be starting. He did start, then he went out very early. So it looks like Ben Roethlisberger probably will get the start again, assuming he didn't suffer any setbacks following that strong performance against the Browns. So there's a look at some of the injuries from this past week's games. All right, guys, that'll conclude the Week 11 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. I want to remind you, as I announced at the top of this podcast, that if you guys are interested in obtaining my Week 11 NFL recommendations that I share with clients, and you want to get those for free to see exactly how I break down these games for clients and what my recommendations look like, you can do that this week. This is the week that you're able to do that. You just go to the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com. At the website, go to the Purchase tab, and on the Purchase tab, you're going to be looking for the NFL Week 11 free preview that is $1 in terms of its purchase price. You're going to go ahead and get that. The reason it's $1 is because you have to actually check out with something to get into the system. That it can't be a price of $0 by my system, so it's got to be $1. You check out. That gets you into the system. That gets you all the pre-release announcements, letting you know exactly when the recommendations are going to be coming out, and then an email that alerts you as to what the exact recommendation is with a link to the write-up that I provide along with that release. So all of that is $1, and then that $1 gets refunded to you on Tuesday. So at the end of the Monday night game on Tuesday morning, I'll go through and refund everybody. So it is, no doubt, 100% free, but you need to be in the system in order to get those emails to alert you when the games are being released. So this is the week. So far this season, I'm hitting 63% overall in the NFL, including 65% on my computer totals. So hope you guys are looking forward to checking out some of those recommendations for free. Also encourage you, also for free, subscribe to this podcast, of course. Check out this podcast on iTunes, on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to it. We will be back on Saturday with Evan Silva, back from New York and the Daily Fantasy Convention he was at up there. We're going to go ahead and break down all these Week 11 games with Evan on Saturday, get you the most recent up-to-date information for you late in the week, so that you guys are going to be able to get a lot of good insight and information. So we look forward to recording that with Evan and sharing that with you guys on Saturday while you're watching some of the college games. And until then, have a great rest of the week. Enjoy breaking down these games, and good luck.
This is gonna be a fun ride. This is gonna be a fun ride. Everybody one clap. I'm gonna play when I wanna play, do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. Take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it. I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks. Great cash, homie. I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks. Great cash, homie. Everybody one clap, one clap, one clap, one clap.